Keck, he passed away August 5th, 1950. Didn't you tell me that he was walking home from work?
He was at work.
He was at work when he had a heart attack?
He was painting his boss's... He was painting the ceiling for his boss's new rumpus room.
Oh, he was at his boss's place.
Yeah, it was a Saturday morning and he wasn't supposed to be working. But his boss had been building this new rumpus room or den on their house, and he asked Dad to come over and paint the ceiling, or paint it. I think there were 2 or 3 of them from the shop that went over there.
Oh, to help that day.
To help that day. Dad didn't really want to go. He didn't feel good that morning. He didn't want to go. He said he was tired. But he went because he promised his boss he would. And he was supposed to come home about noon, and he and Mom and I were going to go downtown to buy me a piano.
That's right.
And Mom and I were getting dressed, getting ready to go to meet him when he got home, so we could all go downtown. And this guy knocked on the door and said he came to pick up Dad's clothes, take him to the funeral parlor. That's all we had heard. That's the first we had heard.
Do you know who the guy was?
It was one of the guys that worked with Dad, and I don't know which one it was.
Somebody your mom knew?
Yeah, Mom knew who he was. But he'd come over to pick up, they'd sent him over to pick up Charlie's clothes. And about 5 minutes later, the boss showed up, and he was so pissed that the guy had gotten there before he...
Yeah.
You know,
And that he'd say something like that without...
And he would say, yeah.
Without first figuring it, acknowledging.
But evidently, Dad was painting the ceiling, he said, and he got down and bent over to put the paintbrush in the
Bucket.
can of paint, or the bucket of paint, and he fell over. And when they called the emergency crew out, I don't know who they called, I really don't know, but whoever they called to come out said that he had to have been dead by the time he hit the floor, that it was an instant death. And that was...
I remember you telling me something about your mother yelling when she found out, or something.
I was upstairs. The guy came to the door. We heard the knock on the door. We heard the noise at the door. Figured it was Dad coming home. Mm-hmm. So Mother went to the door. She was downstairs, and I was on the top landing. And I heard Mother yell, Mother scream, "Oh no!"
Yeah.
And
so that's how she found out.
That's how she found out. It was not a good way, considering the fact that we didn't know. Dad had never told us that he'd been under the doctor's care all summer. Mother and I had been up north.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
And he had been under the doctor's care all summer, but he didn't want to worry us. So he didn't want to worry Mother, so he wouldn't tell anybody.
Under the doctor's care, so he must have had some chest pains earlier.
Chest pains earlier. Well, I know when he picked us up at the train station and we went to order dinner, he ordered a very unusual dinner for him. I think he ordered oatmeal or something like that. You know? That was, he was always a steak and potatoes guy.
Oh.
And Mother had made some comment about it, and he said, well, he just wasn't hungry. But evidently the doctor had put him on a pretty strict diet, or, but he wouldn't tell, he didn't tell anybody, he didn't want to worry anybody.
Wow. You guys had been up north, meaning you were at Aunt Mary's?
We were at Grandma's.
At Grandma's, and
no, because my grandma was already gone. We were we would have been at Aunt Hattie's.
Aunt Hattie's. And where was she at?
Redwood City. Yeah, it was for one of the weddings. It was for Dick's or Betty Jean's wedding.
And who are Dick and Betty Jean?
Aunt Mary's 2 children.
Okay.
It was for one of their weddings that we'd been up there.
And where was that at? I'm sorry?
Redwood City.
Oh, she was also, okay.
Yeah. See, it was...
So that would have been August 1950.
Yeah.
So you guys had been up there. Were you up there for your birthday?
We went up after my birthday.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'd gone to Idlewild for my birthday. I spent my birthday at Idlewild at church camp.
And that was when you stepped forward to be a missionary?
Yeah. That was quite a summer, because in August was when Butch died. In June was when Butch died. So just before I went up to the camp.
Oh, wow. And how old was Butch?
He would have been 3 at the 4th of July,
And that's Aunt Millie's son.
just before his 3rd birthday.
And the other, was Karen and Nancy, were they born yet when that happened?
Nancy was 6 months old, Karen was a year old.
Okay.
Nancy went to the hospital the day Butch died for the same
Or the same symptoms that Butch had?
Same symptoms that Butch had, yeah.
And you had mentioned that they had done an autopsy on
They
Butch.
did an autopsy on Butch, which showed them what to do for Nancy because they didn't know how to. It came on very suddenly, and what happened was his lungs just closed up. It started in the tiniest little bronchial tubes, and his lungs closed up.
And did you say it was bronchiolitis?
They called it bronchiolitis, yeah.
Wow. That was a traumatic summer.
It was a very traumatic summer, yeah. And then on the way home from Dad's funeral was when Perry, Millie's husband, got his notice to Korea.
Wow.
He was Air Force Reserve.
So in June, Aunt Millie lost her son, and in August, she lost her dad, and then in August, her husband was also...
Was called to the service.
To move.
He was injured in the accident on his way to Korea. And he got as far as Japan, and they were reloading a plane, and a stack of crates fell over and broke his arm. So they shipped him back to Victorville. Okay, after he got back to Victorville, he was in the hospital at George Air Force Base, and he was there for quite a while. Millie had to catch a series of streetcars and trains and buses to get out to Victorville from our place in downtown LA to see him. Of course, the 2 girls were little, so she closed up their house and moved in with Mother and I.
Oh, okay.
Because they were living in Pico Rivera at the time. They just bought their house in Pico Rivera before that, just when Nancy was a baby and was born. And so they moved in with Mother and I, so then Millie had to take this long trip out to Victorville. That was an all day, at least an all day. It seemed to me she might have spent the night out there and come back the next day. But anyway, it was quite a quite a time.
And to take her babies with her.
Well, we took care of the babies most of the time.
That's a good idea.
Mother and I did. We took turns with them.
Rough time.
It was.
Now tell me about your dad. What kind of a person was he? What are some of your memories of your dad?
Oh, Dad was always. It seems like he lived up to his favorite song. He was always chasing rainbows. He was always going to make a fortune somewhere. But
I take it you're referring to the song, I'm Always Chasing Rainbows. That one, and there was another one you said was one of his favorites. Was it Tiny Bubbles, or was it Long Walk, or something?
I'm forever blowing bubbles. Pretty bubbles in the air.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's the song, that's right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the other song. Forever blowing bubbles.
And then it's a long, long way
To Tipperary.
No, that's not the one I'm thinking of. It's a long, long path. It's a
With
Christian.
Someone Like You. Oh, no.
It's a Christian song, I believe.
The Christian song.
I don't remember it now.
In the Garden and The Old Rugged Cross were his 2 favorite hymns.
Okay.
And
And they actually played one of them at the service, right? Tell me, where was his service at? How did you?
it was at Pierce Brothers Mortuary on Washington Boulevard, just about 6 blocks from our house.
Oh, it's really close.
Yeah, in fact, when Don and Millie and I were going to high school, when I was going to high school, they didn't live there. They were, I had to go right by it on the way to school. That's right by it. It was about halfway between our house and the high school.
What was the high school?
It was on Washington and Flower.
What was it called?
John H. Francis Polytechnic High. Ta-da. John H. Francis.
Oh, John H. Francis. I don't know if I ever knew that part of it. It's always Poly or Polytech, you call it.
We called it Polly.
Blue and gold.
Blue and gold, and Polly Parrot. Little Parrot was our mascot.
Why? talking about parrots. There's all kinds of them this morning
Yep.
here in Arcadia.
Yeah.
So, talk about high school. So you and Dad went to high school together, but you really didn't know each other in high school.
We met each other once. I knew who he was because he ran for student body office.
Okay.
He was one of the socials in school. And actually, I didn't, when he ran for student body office, I voted for the other guy.
You guys weren't dating at the time.
No. We had met once at a student government meeting. I was playing the piano. I got there a little bit early. It was during lunch hour. I was there a little bit early, and I was playing the spinning song on the piano. And he's always been fascinated with music, and he wanted to play an instrument. And he came over and we talked a little bit, and he was talking about my playing the piano. And as far as we never thought to talk to each other again after that. He was a year ahead of me, and he graduated. And when he graduated, he had all these honors. He was graduated with the highest IQ and the second highest IQ in the school. The other guy was in my class. But he got the American Legion of Citizenship Award, had all these big things. And then it was, well, of course, then I graduated in 51. It was right after that, no, it was before I graduated. It was when I was in my senior year, and he had already graduated. And right after Dad died, that he started coming to our church.
Grandma Pitts had told me that the first person that they met at the church
was Dad.
So they must have come to
came
visit.
right about the time
That Dad said it was that week.
that week. Yeah.
Oh, really? So the Sunday before he passed away.
Yeah, it was. It was because I had just come back from camp, and I gave the sermon that morning.
Oh, wow.
And your dad talked about that's when he decided he was going to marry me. I didn't even know him yet.
Well, he had a plan.
Yeah, because I was the missionary officer of our CYF, and I had made the dedication at that conference, and so I got to give the sermon that morning.
And that was the day that Grandma Pitts and Dad had come to visit. Because Grandma Pitts said that she walked up to the door, and I don't remember, she said that your dad opened the door, or when they opened the door, he was standing there, and she said he was very friendly, made them feel very comfortable, had a big smile, and she always really appreciated that.
Mother and Dad almost always greeted people at the door.
Yeah.
On Sunday mornings. That was, hand out bulletins and welcomed everybody.
They kind of lived down there, huh?
They kind of did. There was a time that we had something going on at the church between Don had already moved out when Millie came back, and in any of that time, between all of our different groups and the choir and our different Sunday school groups, now we were at the church every evening of the week.
And you lived close, right? So you could walk to it?
It was about 10 blocks.
Okay.
We'd walk. Dad wouldn't let us girls walk to church by ourselves, so he'd walk up there to take us to church, walk all the way back home. A couple hours later, he'd walk back up and
Come get you
meet us
guys.
and walk us home again.
Aw, that's cool.
Unless we knew in advance that we could get somebody to drive us home.
And I think, if I remember right, nobody in the family drove,
No,
right? Not even your dad.
not even Dad. Well, we had a car when I was a baby. It was wrecked right in front of the church when I was about 3 years old.
In the same church?
Pico Church, yeah.
Pico
Pico Heights.
Heights.
Pico Heights Christian Church. Dad had parked the car, and it was one that he had been given to him by one of his bosses at work.
Oh, Foster and Kleiser?
Foster and Kleiser. And it was a big old Buick, the kind that had a little extra seat to fold it down in the back. That was always my place.
Be the baby.
Be the baby. It was low. I could sit on it.
Yes.
And we had parked in front of the house right next door to the church. Everybody was getting out of the car. I'd forgotten something and went back. I think if I dropped my Bible or something like that, and I went back, opened the door, got my Bible out, closed the door, and I still had my hand on the door when the car swung around the corner and hit us.
Wow.
Actually, it hit the car behind us and then sandwiched us into the car in front of us.
Wow.
My hand was on the door when that
Impact.
impact started. And Dad never bought another car. We never had another car.
Wow.
I remember that one real well. I remember that day.
So was your, speaking of your dad, I'm thinking about your memories of him. You have a lot of memories of him at church, obviously. He was very involved.
Very involved. If anything ever needed repairing, particularly if anything needed painting,
Back as being a painter, yes.
being a painter, he would donate the paint, and he would donate the
Supplies.
the supplies and the arm to do it. He would do it.
Yeah.
And
And he
was chairman of the board, seemed like forever. It seemed like he was always chairman of the board, but I know that there were others at different times, but he was always involved.
and Dr. Fish was the minister, or the pastor, the preacher.
Yeah.
And they were real close,
The
right?
Fishes were good. Actually, Dr. Fish and Dad were real good friends.
Mm.
They kind of had an understanding because they had both worked in downtown LA during the Depression. Dr. Fish had been a streetcar conductor before he became a minister, and in LA. And so he and Dad had a lot of memories that they shared.
Mm-hmm.
And they both liked to smoke cigars.
Okay.
And there wasn't too many places that Dr. Fish could smoke cigars comfortably.
He could at your house?
He could at our house.
Oh, so you come to the house to have a
He'd come
cigar
over
and
see us
visit.
a lot, quite often.
Oh, that's cool,
And
okay.
your dad would sit out on the front porch and have a cigar. Talk. Yeah,
So-
and, yeah, Dad and Mom were both always involved. Mother was the supervisor of the primary department.
Primary meaning the
Yeah,
young
Sunday
kids?
school,
Mhm.
yeah. Cradle roll and up through, I think about up through fourth grade, third or fourth grade.
She would teach them and get the other teachers to teach.
Yeah, and she was in charge of the whole course there. And when the church burned down, it caught fire. I think we were still living on Orchard, so it had been before 1939. The church caught fire, and they saved part of the original sanctuary. Part of it burned down, and they actually it was the original recreation hall that they were saved. Well, that was saved, and that was back farther in the lot. They built a new church in front of that, and the old building was the Sunday school rooms. They also had a full stage in it, and we put on all kinds of theatrical extravaganzas.
Mm-hmm.
Being so close to Hollywood, we always had potential singers and dancers and actors around.
That's true, I hadn't thought of that, but that would be true.
There was up on New Hampshire, not too far from the church, actually between our place and the church, there was a boarding house for young starlets to be young hopefuls.
Yeah, okay.
In fact, I think that's where Diana Lynn lived when she was coming to the church. She was an actress and a piano player. And she and Joe Fish, Dr. Fish's youngest son, dated for a while.
Okay. And she went on to be an actress?
She went on to make several movies.
Oh, Diana Lynn?
Diana Lynn. I remember her big famous line was that she could play the minute waltz in 30 seconds.
Did she play at the church? Did you play the piano over at the church?
Sometimes.
Did your mom play the piano at the church?
No, not much. In the Sunday school.
Okay.
She played, oh gosh, yeah, she ran the Sunday school. She played, she taught us songs, she taught us little singing games.
And then you went on to teach the cradle.
I taught the cradle roll the year I was It was between 48 and 50 because Butch was in my class, my little nephew. He passed away in 1950. He was in the class, so it was in that 3 years, or 2.5 years of his life
You were teaching
that I was his teacher. I went in, I was just a teenager at the time, and I went in as a helper for the lady that was teaching the class. And she had some family problems, and I went in there, and I think I'd helped her about 2 weeks, and I got there one Sunday morning and she wasn't there. And so I took the class, and we had half a dozen little little kids in there.
Cradle roll being 4 or 5 or 3?
Preschool.
Preschool.
And I had about a half dozen little ones in there, most of them little boys. I think there were 2 little girls in the class, and they actually didn't come very often. 3 of the little boys were a family with twins and their older brother. A year older than mine. And very, very feral, shall we say.
Wild, in other words?
Wild. I used to come home with bruises on my shins from those little boys.
One being your nephew.
No, just the little dice boys, the twins and their
little
brother.
And she ran into one of them at Mike's wedding? Somebody's wedding.
Oh, at my reunion, I ran into the brother. The older
You
brother
ran
was
into
there.
one of the twins at one of the family weddings we went to, because you told us afterwards, I used to babysit him and his twin brother.
And they were wild children.
Actually, I'd forgotten that. Yeah, that's right, I guess I did. Forgot about that. There was quite a little, but anyway, Pauline never came back to the class. She had some family problems. I think they were getting a divorce,
Which was totally unheard of in 48.
yeah, it was a big deal. And boy, she couldn't teach Sunday school anyway, you know.
Because she was getting
And
divorced.
so I ended up, for most of that couple of years, at least for a year, I was teacher of that class.
And you would have been about 15 or 16?
About 15.
Wow.
I taught the little boys how to sing Jesus Loves Me for Christmas. And I was so proud of them because, I mean, when you get a little 2-year-olds, 2 and 3-year-olds, try to teach them how to perform,
That's true.
together.
Yeah, I remember you.
I taught them how to sing Jesus Loves Me, and they had practiced it, and they had done it so well. And the night of the Christmas program, we were all sitting on the front row of the church, and the baptistry sat in the middle of the stage. Right behind, there was a little platform in front of the baptistry. And I didn't think about walking the boys up onto the stage ahead of time. I just figured they'd handle it, you know, because we practiced how they were. We told them, we talked about how. But anyway, it was time for us to perform, and the boys all lined up, very sweet. There was 5 of them that night. And they walked up on the stage, and as they walked up on the stage, the first one noticed that the baptistry was there, that there was this great big swimming pool in the hole in the floor, and turned around and looked at it, and all the other ones turned around and looked at it, turning their backs to the audience and bending over, looking in the pool, and I could not get them to turn around to sing the song. They sang the song with their backs to the audience.
Or the behinds to the audience.
Their behinds to the audience. They were precious. Got a laugh out of the audience.
Kids will do that at the church program every time.
So I remember the first one, and it might have been Daryl Branstetter, who walked up and said, "Wow!" Everybody, what?
So you were saying the church burned down about 39?
Something like that.
And then you talked about being at the church still in 1950. So how long were you guys at that church?
We started going to that church when I was 2 years old. And
1935 would be when you were 2 years
I
old.
was married in that church.
In 1951.
Debbie and Pam and Rick were all blessed at that church
So that would have been in 53,
Till we moved
54,
to,
56.
till we moved.
So you were
Well, actually, yeah, we were still we were in Burbank, we were in Glendale. We were still going once in a while. When we moved out of downtown LA, we lived a year in Burbank, and we lived a year in several years in various houses in Highland Park.
Where's Highland Park?
It's between Glendale and Pasadena.
Okay. And when you say we, you're talking about now when you're married and...
Being married, yeah.
Okay.
We moved out of downtown LA when Debbie was a baby.
Okay.
We lived in Burbank, we came back, we lived for a little while, then we went back out, we got the house in Highland Park, and then we moved in several places out there until we moved up to Uniform.
So basically, that would have been 1960-ish that you moved to Santa Maria?
60, we moved to Santa Maria.
And you started going to that church in 1935. Wow, 25 years in the same church. Wow.
In the last couple of years that we were there in LA, the church merged with, the little church was closed down. Well, actually, there was a Korean church, I think, that was meeting there. Because as churches do, after a while, they start going broke.
Yeah.
And so the Korean church was meeting there, and our church merged with the Pico Arlington Church, which was a total change, because our Pico Heights was a little wooden, country-looking church. We used to call it the little country church in the big city.
Okay.
And then we moved into the Pico Arlington Church, which was styled after one of the big cathedrals in Europe.
That's the one I remember. That's the one that Grandma Mall's services were at, and Robbie's Blessing was at.
Yeah, that was the
We
Pico
had a
Arlington
a Passover feast there one time.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's within the 60s.
yeah, because I brought you and Doug down for that.
Yeah.
Uh,
I didn't realize that Pico Heights, that wasn't Pico Heights. I didn't know that you guys had, there was another building initially. Where was the original building at?
On Veranda Street, right off of Pico.
Veranda with B's and boys? Veranda Street?
Berendo,
Berendo.
Berendo. Because the Vermont Avenue and we lived at Washington and Vermont, basically. The church was at Pico and Berendo, which was about as far off of Vermont to the west as our house was to the east.
Okay.
It was about real close, and just a block on Berendo, just a block from the other side of the church was the junior high school that got a million island too.
Oh, okay. And where was Pico Arlington in comparison?
It was on further west.
Pico in Arlington.
On the corner of Pico and Arlington, that's right.
Arlington Church, what do you know? Original name, wasn't it?
It was originally the Arlington Church, and we were the Pico Heights Church, and when we merged, it became the Pico Arlington Church.
And happened to be on Pico and Arlington.
Happened to be on the corner of Pico and Arlington, and there was a little miniature golf course right across the street.
Funny. So whatever happened to the original building, do you know?
The last I knew, it was still there. The little Korean church kept it, and for a long time it was still. But I don't know, I haven't been down in that area for many, many years.
Now that's East LA now, right?
It's basically, it's considered, I think, South Central.
Oh, great.
Yeah. That's why I don't go down there.
We'll go visit it.
Between, we lived on Washington in Vermont. 2 blocks up was Venice in Vermont, and then 2 blocks more was Pico in Vermont. In between Washington and Venice was 18th Street. Washington was 19th Street, basically lived at 19th Street. 18th Street, the 18th Street gang is the one that has caused so much trouble down here for so many years.
To the point, you were near MacArthur Park.
Yeah, we were right near MacArthur Park.
Yeah, I mean, I know people who live in other states who are writing papers for their schools about MacArthur Park because it's so bad.
Because
Most
of
of
the
the
gang
kids
problems
that
there.
went to our junior high, a lot of the kids were involved in the gangs even in those days.
Yeah, but that's kind of the way,
But that's big city living.
it's the old part of town, and then it gets
Yeah.
dilapidated and gets to be poor community in there, generally speaking anyway.
So that's,
So did your mom, did she stay there at Pico Arlington?
for a long time until after she and Walter got married, and that was when you were little.
63,
They got married when I was pregnant with Deb.
Oh, 62. Oh.
Or right after that.
Yeah.
Don and Frida got married when I was pregnant. Mother and Walter got married right after that, the same year.
The only reason I think it was after Doug is because I remember Walter claiming me as his granddaughter because I was the only one that was born
Born after
after
they got married. That's right. Doug was
Yeah,
born in
so,
between, so-
Yeah, must have been posted right after he was born.
Yeah.
Well, they were married in October on his
Yeah.
birthday, so it must have been
Yeah,
either 3 months or a year and 3
yeah,
months after.
it was right after. It wasn't long after. That was the same year Don and Frida got married. It was
Yeah.
62. Because I couldn't go to their wedding because I was pregnant, and then I had a brand new baby when I didn't know we got married.
Yeah.
And he claimed you as the only official granddaughter because you were born after they were married.
Yeah, he claimed us all, but,
He claimed everybody, yes, he did. He's a sweetheart.
yeah.
But yeah, they had that little house on Normandy, which was right off Washington Boulevard, and just a block over from Brendo.
Grandma Walter did?
Yeah.
So that was before they moved into the trailer?
Yeah.
Because I only remember the trailer and the little house behind the house. I don't remember.
Yeah, I loved their house.
So their little house, it was a couple blocks over from Washington actually, because it's Washington and Vermont. That's where the Boulevard Theater was, and on one corner, and Foster and Pfizer on the other corner. The drugstore on the other corner, and then the other corner was the California Bank that was to be managed by Mr. Temple, who brought his little daughter Shirley in to dance for the...
Really?
He was our banker.
He brought his daughter in to have her dance for who?
He would put her up on the counter and let her dance for the people coming into the bank.
At the bank. Right across the street from Foster and Kleiser.
Yeah.
I never knew that. Wow. Wow. Of course, that's Shirley Temple.
Yeah, that's Shirley Temple. And Foster and Kleiser was, that whole corner that they were on, which was the southeast corner
Of Washington.
of Washington and Vermont. And the part of the building that was actually on Vermont was leased by Kodak Company, and that's where they processed a lot of the movie film that was brought over, shipped over from the studios that was filmed in those days. And Millie and I used to play with a film that those people would throw away.
Wow.
We used to use it for ribbons to wrap packages with. I wish I had some of that film now.
Oh my goodness.
It kills me to think what we were playing with and destroying.
Yeah. Well, it was in the trash, basically.
Yeah, because they would throw it out, all these big rolls of film and stuff, and when they were processing, of course, when they were splicing it, the scenes that they cut out,
Right.
they would throw in the trash. And we would
Cutting
play
in the
with it.
floor and you didn't end up playing with them. You didn't even know. So they were renting that space, Kodak rented that space from Foster and Kleiser?
But anyways, I started to say about where Mother and Walter
Right.
lived, was on the other side of the Boulevard Theater was Brendo, and that's where my doctor's office was. And then the next block over between Brendo and Normandy was the graveyard.
Okay.
And Mother and Walter's place was on Normandy, backing their backyard backed into the graveyard.
Did Grandma Thompson live next to your graveyard too? Maybe it was maybe I'm remembering Grandma
Grandma
Kex.
Keck was the only one that lived by the
Did
graveyard.
she have a porch on the back that looked over the graveyard?
Yeah. Well,
I remember
it
something
didn't really,
about it.
well, yeah, I guess it just kind
I
of
don't even remember that. I don't remember the graveyard.
I don't. Oh.
I remember a house that had a back porch, and I always thought it was Grandma Thompson's house. Maybe it was Grandma Keck's house. But I remember being at and I was awful little, walking up a couple stairs to a back porch that had railing,
Yeah.
and there was like a big tree and like a park. I was thinking it was like a park
Yeah, it was like
thing.
a park there.
But there was a big tree off to the side, and I remember somebody playing on the rail.
There was a big garage. Walter had an old car in
Yeah,
it.
he had a Model A
It was
and-
probably a detached garage in the back, right?
Mhm.
Because it was older home.
Yeah, it was an original Model T or Model A,
Yeah, one of the two.
one of the two back there.
I was thinking he never drove either. Did he drive? Oh, yeah, that's right, because he's the one who's telling me about racing. So what did the house look like?
It was a little white clapboard house, one story,
2-bedroom probably?
2-bedroom, yeah. And he had lived in that house with his aunt. He had been a caregiver for his aunt. And it had been her house, and then right next door to them was his sister's house. His sister and brother-in-law lived right next door. So they had that property for a long
The
time.
house had actually originally been a duplex, because the summer that I stayed with Grandma, I kept asking her, why do you have two kitchens? Because they had a little tiny kitchen and a regular kitchen. And so she brought me around and showed me what part of the house was one side, one house, and the other part was another house at one point.
It was kind of like, yeah, because when Walter was taking care of his aunt, he lived in part of it, she lived in the other.
They just had a wall,
Yeah.
and they took the wall out and moved it
Yeah,
up into one.
yeah,
Two kitchens?
yeah. One was just a little tiny kitchen, and
Yeah,
the
it's
other
like-
one was a regular kitchen.
But were they close together? Were they on different parts of the house, or like back to back, or?
Back to back, I think. I don't really remember, but
That's so cool, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that graveyard I remember real well, because when we used to come home from church, we would take shortcuts through the graveyard when I, in my teenage years, when with the gang of us, because we all lived, there a lot of us lived, we would walk from the church down to Washington Boulevard, then we'd all go separate directions, because we all lived in the neighborhood. But half the time, instead of going all the way around to Vermont, or all the way around down Normandy, or something like that, we would cut through the graveyard. We'd have to climb a couple fences, but we'd do it. I remember one night, somebody fell in an open grave. And of course, it was always spooky, because we were coming home after dark.
Oh my gosh,
Was that
cutting
for-
through the graveyard after dark. This is just like a script.
It was our CYF, I mean, our teenage group, you know?
Yeah.
And we were always cutting through after, and somebody fell in the grave, and we had to pull them out.
Oh my gosh. It's like Hollywood.
Yeah, yeah. It was pretty close to Hollywood.
Yeah. Sounds like one of the scripts.
Yeah, we always had fun with that. And then, of course, the same bunch of us, most of us went to Poly together, so we have to go by where Pierce Brothers Mortuary was on the other side of our house on the way to high school. It was about 3 blocks that were about, each block had a mortuary in it.
Oh gosh.
And so we would tell stories and
Between the graveyard and the mortuaries. I guess that made sense, having the mortuary so close to the graveyard. So Grandma and Walter lived there. So Walter lived there taking care of his aunt, and when she passed away, he got the house, and then that's when Grandma moved in. Of course,
Yeah.
that was in the 60s, and everybody was grown and gone.
Yeah.
And then then from there, they moved to the little trailer, the one that I remember.
Yeah, that was out in Big Rivera.
I was gonna ask where that was at. I didn't
Yeah,
remember
it was out in
where
Big
it was at.
Rivera.
And it had a big avocado tree.
The trailer park was built, but had originally been an avocado grove. So when they built the park, they left a tree in every little space had a tree in it.
And I wish I had that avocado tree now.
Oh, man.
It was huge.
It was huge.
Of course, I was little, so everything looked bigger, but I remember it was pretty big.
It was a big one. And, actually, it was just like they had put the little trailers in between the trees, almost.
You know, I'm wondering, because I'm thinking now that maybe it was Kathy's funeral that I was at Grandma Keck's.
All right, and that was on Normandy.
I mean, I'm thinking that might be the memory that I'm
Yeah,
having of the back porch.
Little.
You threw your bottle, but you were still taking the bottle. But you were walking. You got away from them that day. They had to go chase you down.
In the graveyard? Maybe that's why I'm remembering. Maybe it was the back porch that they got me. Maybe that's why the memory's there, is being,
But
you know.
there was a couple stories. We left you with Mother and Walter while we went to the funeral.
And Kathy died in like 65, maybe?
Yeah.
Were we in Santa Maria or Nipomo?
Santa Maria?
In Santa Maria.
Oh, wow. So it was
Because
the
David
first
came
part
to
of
live with us
65.
right after that.
Okay. So I was little. I was not even 2.
Yeah, you were only 2 or
I
so.
was less than 2.
Less than 2.
I
18
was
months maybe.
65, yeah.
But, yeah, because we came back from the funeral and Walter felt so bad. He said, you trusted us with your baby and we lost her.
Oh my gosh!
And he couldn't forgive himself.
Really? What happened?
They had turned, I don't remember, I don't know exactly what had happened, but anyway, they had lost, you were playing and they didn't pay any attention for a few minutes, and they turned around and they couldn't find you, and they found you watering up the street or something.
Wow.
But they went into a panic.
Was Doug there with me? Or was I there
Doug
by?
went with us. Yeah,
Okay.
Doug went with us. He went to take care of us.
It seems like you were only like a year and a half old.
Yeah.
That would make sense, because we were,
You were
I was
still
like
on the bottle.
Well, she was only 18 months old when we moved.
20 months old when we moved.
Yeah.
When we moved to
Yeah.
Napalmo, we were
Yeah.
still in Santa Maria.
Yeah, I vividly remember us being in Santa Maria. I remember coming home with the policeman there
Yeah,
That same trip?
it was just before.
when we found out about Kathy.
We had been to the shopping and to the show that night, and our house was always a mess. Kids, you know, there was all stuff all over. When we came home, we pulled up in the driveway, and the front door was partway open.
Our phone
Policeman
didn't
was
work at
there.
the time. Our phone didn't work at the time. Grandma couldn't get a hold of us, so she called the police department to come tell us about Kathy.
The
Goodness.
police had come out, well, they had come out, and they had found we thought we'd been,
Oh my gosh.
thought we'd been ransacked.
Oh, that had been robbed.
And they had this message to tell us about it,
Oh my
Kathy's accident.
gosh. So what happened? You guys came home and,
And we
They were
talked-
there.
They were there waiting for it. They were there wandering around, and they said, well, we found the door open, and he kind of looked inside and kind of motioned, and they said, oh, I just didn't have time to clean today. About this time, all the rest of the kids are piling out of the car.
oh my goodness, yeah.
So the police talked to Mom and Dad, and then after they left, they set us down on the couch to tell us.
Yeah.
You guys knew Kathy, of course.
No.
She had been up there just a few weeks before.
I had spent the summer, a
She-
large part of the summer, taking care of Kathy.
really?
Well, she had been to her, hello, we had all three of the kids up there for a couple weeks that summer at our place.
And you must have gone down there as well then.
And we went down
I
there.
went down there.
And she was hit by a car,
And just before her third birthday.
just like Butch.
Just like Butch.
Wow.
And I still get queasy when I see a little one that's almost 3. I still-
Oh, and I know that is why it bothers me so bad when I see parents walking with their toddlers straggling behind them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I see parents crossing the middle of the streets, it just makes me sick.
Hold
Yeah.
their hand.
Yeah.
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 Because you know and the experience, yeah. So how old were you, Pam, when that happened then? That would have been in 65, we decided. You were 11, not even 11 yet.
Not 11 years.
He moved in 65, so
Right.
it would have been
It would have been 64.
64.
Wow.
Because David had already spent
Yeah,
the school year with us.
Yeah. David was in kindergarten.
He came to live with you before Kathy died, is that what you
No,
said?
it was after Kathy died.
Okay.
We went down there, we went back and forth quite a bit that right after that time. And we went over to the house after school started. We went down for something, and David was playing around, running around the neighborhood, because he was already living with Granny, with Gigi and Granny Moss.
This was after Kathy
After
passed away,
Kathy died.
the summer school, I mean the summer year, I
Yeah,
mean the
that's
school
summer.
year is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, in the school year. And
In
he
kindergarten.
made some comment about if he was going to school yet, because he was old enough, he should have been in kindergarten. And nobody had bothered to
Registered.
register him. Hazel said, well, I'm working, I can't do it. And Grandma Ball didn't know what to do, or, she said, well, he doesn't need to go. And so we talked to Rick, and we talked to them, and that's why we happened to bring him home with us. I said, if you let him come home with us and go through the school year, and give him some, a sturdy, a substantial background,
Yeah.
because he needs some structure. And he'll be with the other kids, he'll be okay with that. And so that was fine, it was decided, okay, that he's going to pack up and come home with us. In the meantime, it was just after Kathy's funeral, it wasn't very long after. Because in the meantime, they had gotten the paperwork to take Chris away from Tony.
Oh, so Chris would have been
He was
just a year old, a
just
little over a year
Just
old,
a little over a year
or a
old.
year and a half or something.
Yeah.
At 65, he would have been 2.
Yeah, and it was before he was his second birthday.
Okay, so.
And so they had gotten the okay to take Chris. And we talked, your dad and I talked to Rick, and we said, it would be so easy, so much easier on everybody if we could take both boys home with us, and they would have each other, and they would be structured, and they would be out of the hassle of everybody, out of the big grieving hassle, you know,
Yeah.
and then the battle between Rick and Tony. So the three of us and Tony went out one night, and Rick said, okay, so the next day they were planning on going in and taking Chris, physically, going to the
They
house.
meaning the authorities.
The authorities were going in to take Chris. And so that night, Tony didn't know it.
Oh.
Tony didn't know that the papers had already come on. So Rick said, let's go out, we'll all have an evening out, we'll go to dinner, we'll talk. And Mary, you see if you can talk Tony into letting you take Chris home with you. Because you can explain it to her better. And I tried, and I could understand. Tony says, I've already lost my little girl.
Yeah.
I've lost one baby, and my other one's living with his grandma. I just can't bear to lose the other one. And I could understand exactly where she was going.
Yeah, but she was,
But I couldn't tell her that they were coming out the next
Right.
day. And
but that was hard.
it was a real heartbreaking evening. And then the next day, we went out and got Chris, and that's when Chris, the grandmothers decided that Chris was going to stay there.
So,
And I don't know, I found out later, I think that there was something in the paperwork that meant that Rick had to have, that Chris had to be in the same residence Rick was in.
oh, and Rick was living with grandma.
Rick was living with
But
her.
Rick and Tony were divorced when Kathy died then? So I didn't realize that either. I thought that they got divorced because of it.
Tony was pregnant with Maya. She
Oh.
was living with another guy and pregnant with Maya.
So I must,
Because I know the summer that she died, the three kids had been up there that summer for a couple of weeks up at our place. Because we were laughing about, we had three little boys in one bedroom and three little girls in the other bedroom. And that's when your dad and I were talking at the time, well, they were all perfect stair steps. And I said, there's a perfect family right there.
That's before the Brady Bunch even. The original Brady Bunch.
That's right. And so then, you know, with us taking David home and then wanting to take Chris home, and that became a big deal between, I'm sorry to say, that became a big deal between Gigi and I.
Oh,
That was where we started.
she wanted him and you wanted him and,
And I felt so much that we could do so much better for him than they were, because there was no structure down there.
Well, Grandma was working and well, Grandma Mall, I mean, we're talking great-grandma.
Yeah, right,
raising,
she was-
basically,
In her 70s or 80s or...
yeah,
well,
she was born in
my 70s too.
1886 and this was in the
Yeah,
60s, so,
yeah, and she just didn't have the energy
yeah.
to chase after a rambunctious little guy like Chris.
He was too, boy,
He
those
was
pictures,
wired
he
all
was
the
so
time.
cute. He was always smiling and he had this
Yeah.
curly hair, but my gosh, he had curly hair. They had such a fit when he got his
Oh,
haircut.
we got his haircut.
Who did?
Grandma and Grandma,
Why? I mean, who cut his hair? Probably
Tricia?
Uncle Rick.
Your dad and I and Rick and Trish.
Went and got his hair cut.
and he had these beautiful curls. He looked like a little girl. He really
Grandma
did
let
look
his
like a
hair
little girl.
grow. He had curls down to his shoulders.
Oh, wow.
And he was
Well, Rick was there though, right? He was living there with them.
in and out. He was...
And he was
yeah.
working nights,
He was working nights and he was...
Okay,
sleeping days, and
okay.
He was not really a figure in
Not available at that point, yeah.
but we couldn't come to an agreement on that. And all I kept getting from Gigi was, you've got too many kids up there, you don't need another one. And to me, I've got that many kids and another one would work in right, it would be better for them to be with those kids.
Yeah.
But it would have been...
Hindsight, it would have been
Yeah.
better for him to be there. How long did David live with you guys?
He
With us,
actually
I
lived
guess I
with
was
us-
there too.
He actually lived with us officially for a year.
That was the year in Santa Maria.
The year in Santa Maria. He didn't, he went back down to LA, yeah, just before we moved to Cuomo.
Okay.
But of course, he was up there every summer, every chance he got. And every time we'd go down to LA, he'd hide out in the car and we'd have to take
it's
him
kind of
back.
like Mackenzie.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Very much like Mackenzie.
very much like Mackenzie. Yeah, we got all the way to Ventura one time, and he popped up out of the back of the station wagon. He'd been hiding.
No way! And that was before cell phones for Grandma to call and say, do you have David with you?
They didn't know where he was. They hadn't missed him yet.
Yeah, it's been 4 hours at least that he was gone. Did you take him on home or did you turn around and go back?
We called him from Ventura when he popped up.
Yeah.
We stopped at a little restaurant down there and had something to eat.
Ventura's not 4 hours away.
It's on-
No, but I was thinking 2 hours there and then 2 hours back to deliver
Oh.
him is what I was
Oh,
thinking.
yeah.
Actually, we brought him on home and they came up the next weekend and got him.
So let's spend the week.
So he won anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
But that was what it was. Every time we left, he would pack up his little suitcase and start packing the car. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah, that is heartbreaking.
That's why I've always considered David as one of ours.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's always acted that way too.
Yeah.
More so than Chris, because Chris didn't have that same relationship with
Yeah,
us.
Chris grew up with Grandma and Grandma.
With
Yeah.
Grandma.
Yeah, he did. From the time he was a baby, obviously. I didn't realize it was that early.
But David has told me several times our home was his structure place.
Yeah.
And that was his place when things got tough. He could come up to our place and regroup and then go handle it even after when he got older. He always felt that.
Yeah.
Of course, when he got married,
First thing he did when he was able to is he moved up to that area.
well, they came and lived with us.
Yeah.
When he went in the Army,
Mhm.
he brought his family up for us to take care of them.
Yeah. Yep, he did. So Chris was raised in Kingsley.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I really didn't realize that either.
When Rick and Maureen got married, we took the boys with them, but Maureen never wanted the boys.
And Chris was very, very difficult for her.
Yeah.
I mean,
Chris was difficult for him.
Yeah.
But,
I remember one of the stories, Maureen telling, and just absolutely,
Mortified.
Chris was little, and I guess, and Maureen was very tall. At least I remember her as
yeah,
being
she
tall.
was tall.
And Chris came up to her one day, put his hand up and grabbed her boob and said, "Look how tall I am."
Totally innocent. Totally, I mean, that's what little kids do. And she was mortified.
That didn't work out, so the boys were in trouble at school. And back to Gigi's and, back
Yeah.
and forth all the time.
That's right, because he did pretty much live with Rick after that, because I remember them living in Ontario. Whittier?
They lived in Hacienda
Hacienda
Heights,
Okay.
which is a little southeast of here.
It's just beyond Omani.
Oh, okay. Well,
So it was, but it was, I always considered those boys remind me particularly David. He was one of us.
and he was so close with Rick in his
So-
age, too.
He and Rick used to battle.
They still, from David's viewpoint, they still do. David is in constant competition with Rick in his mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny how they kind of paired up. It was David and Rick had that competition going, and Chris and Doug had that little deal going where every time we went down there, Chris would do something, Doug would get blamed for it. Doug was the one that never did anything right. Chris always did everything wrong.
Which we know was actually
It was actually
the opposite. Well, I can't say never, but
Yeah.
because Doug was Doug too.
Doug
so-
was Doug too,
That was
yeah,
pretty
but-
precocious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's my point, yeah.
yeah. Doug made Gigi uncomfortable, she always said, because he talked like an adult. And she couldn't understand a small child talking like an adult.
He's just so intelligent.
He was like that. And it did make her uncomfortable. And of course, Chris could do no wrong as far as she was concerned anyway, so that's just the way it worked out. But got blamed.
Got blamed. Let's go back to your family.
Okay.
Your dad worked for Foster and Kleiser as a painter. Tell me what the story you were talking about, him working and meeting Foster up in San Francisco?
He was working for Mr. Kleiser
Kleiser, okay.
before they became Foster and Kleiser.
He was working for Mr. Kleiser in San Francisco.
And I don't know whether he was working for him down here or up there. I really
Okay.
don't know for
Okay.
sure. All I know is, see, Foster and Kleiser has two plants, one in San Francisco and one in LA. But this was before the plants were done, and I don't know what the situation was at that time. I know that Dad worked for Mr. Kleiser, and I know that after the earthquake in
In San-
1906, Dad was in San Francisco doing the cleanup and painting, repaintings and repairing. And Don could tell you stories that he told, that he got from Dad about some of his experiences. I know Don was telling me about one where Dad was talking about that they were working in a building, repainting a wall in a building, and the floor collapsed, and they ended up down in the basement in an opium den.
Oh my gosh! I guess the structures weren't really secured yet.
Right.
Wow.
And I also know that I have found out that I know back in the back of Mom's and Dad's closet, I used to love to sneak in there. There was a little leather possibles bag with a powder horn and a little Derringer pistol in it, and all the accoutrements for it. This is when I first got fascinated with black powder, and I didn't even know what
Yeah.
it was. But it was something that Dad had found in the rubbish of one of the buildings up there in San Francisco.
When he was doing the
When
cleanup.
he was doing the cleanup up there.
Oh, wow.
Because I remember, I also was fascinated with it, and I was going there and just the feel of the leather pouch and all the stuff, you know, I just, because Mother didn't want me anywhere near it, but
Yeah.
it was hanging on the hook behind her clothes. So I sneak back there.
Yeah.
You know.
So he was working for Mr.
So he was
Kleiser.
working for Mr. Kleiser, and he was working on he also was on scaffolding up there, and of course after the earthquake there was a lot of aftershocks.
Yeah.
And he'd be up on the scaffolding on the sides of some of these buildings, working on signs and such, and the scaffolding would be
Rocking.
teetering, rocking back and forth. It was
Wow.
probably pretty harrowing.
Pretty dangerous.
But then he came down here to work at the LA plant, and when they had the plant.
Yeah.
It was after the partnership.
After it became Foster and Kleiser.
He became Foster and Kleiser. He was down here to work at Foster and Kleiser at the plant. And they had trouble, I guess we started in San Francisco, because they were having trouble keeping the paint on the signs down here. That they were shipping the paint down from up there,
From San Francisco
from
to
San
LA.
Francisco, and the paint that they were using on the billboards up there was working fine for the weather conditions. But down here, it kept peeling. And it was, I guess, I don't know, because that was pretty wet up there, so I guess it was the dryness down here that they're doing. You know, the paint would buckle up and peel, and they couldn't keep it on the boards. And Dad he was a handyman. He was always going to fix things.
Okay.
And he kept experimenting and working and playing around and with it. And he discovered accidentally at the time, I don't know what his thought process was, but anyway,
To try it, yeah.
he tried some molasses, some plain old blackstrap molasses in the paint, mixed it in, and it worked great in his experiments. And so he went over, and I don't know whether he was actually working in the mixing room yet, because he always had such an eye for color that it didn't take long for him to be the one that made the formulas for the different shades of colors, because he knew how to mix paint. And he could look at the color and analyze it, and that, even the shades and shading.
On your face,
on your
the
face
skin,
and all.
yeah.
But anyway, he ended up mixing the molasses into the paint for the billboards, and it started sticking, and so he got the job.
He didn't tell him that that's what it
That
was.
was his secret formula. He wasn't going to let anybody know it. He had it at lock and key.
Wow. But they made him in charge of the mixing room.
But they put him in charge of the mixing room because he wouldn't tell anybody how he was doing it. He guaranteed his job.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he had a couple of other things like the green for the the lattice work and the framework around the billboards was a special green that was his formula that he wouldn't tell anybody how he mixed it, what colors he used to mix it.
Did they use those colors then in San Francisco as well? Or just in
I
Los
really
Angeles?
don't know.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised because
It was
I
kind
know
of-
that book that I have of some of the old signs, they were either white or green.
Yeah.
And then they tell the green went to war during World War II. Everything that was, the color green went to war
Oh.
because they used it in the camouflage.
Mhm.
During World War II was so different than any war since then. It was everybody sacrificed for the supplies for the troops.
Mhm.
We saved rubber, we saved tin, we saved paper, everything that could be recycled to make things for the soldiers and for the ammunition,
efforts,
for
yeah.
anything, whatever was needed. People sacrificed here so that it could be reused instead of just
Yeah.
raising prices for everything.
Right.
But anyway,
But the color green
the
went to
color
war,
green went to war because that was the basic color for khaki. And
which means
for-
people here stopped using green?
all the big companies, all the Lucky Strike cigarettes used to be in a little green package.
Really?
All of a sudden they had white packages and the big sign Lucky Strike went to war.
Oh.
And there was a lot of different things, different companies that took the green dye out of their supplies so that the green supplies could go to war.
So does that mean that they stopped using that on the lattice, or did he start
They
using
didn't
green
use it.
afterwards?
That's when they started playing around with the, well, they played white lattice work for a while.
Yeah.
And then they started coming up with the aluminum billboards that they didn't paint.
Now, I'm curious, I mean, you've said that, I'm thinking back, if Grandpa came to work for Mr. Kleiser right after the earthquake, around 1906, he was born in 1887. He wasn't even 20 yet, he was 18. And he was already doing painting, he had the eye. Was it something that he learned from his mom or his dad, or was there?
It was something he always did. I don't know.
Did he ever talk about?
I know that, no, he never talked about it with his family that much. His dad was a wood carver, I know that.
Oh,
Because, well, Nancy has the chain that he carved, you know, and take a 4x4 or 2x4 about this long and you carve a chain out of it.
Grandpa's dad did that?
Yeah, I don't know if you ever saw, Mother had it in her house for a
I
long
might
time.
have not realized that that's
The
what it was.
chain links are all interlinked,
Mhm.
and the ends have a little cage with a little ball that moves back and forth inside of it.
Wow.
It's all carved out of a single piece of wood.
And Grandpa's
And
dad did
Grandpa
that.
Keck did that. That guy up there did
Well,
that.
with missing a finger guy.
Well, I don't know if he did it before or
Before.
after, because between that and being a brakeman on the railroad, you know,
Plus, it's part of his hand,
he was
right?
part of his hand on that. I think he pretty much kind of crawled into the still after that, from what I understand. Even in the house out in Bellevue, he had a still in the garage.
How old was your dad when his dad died?
I don't really know.
Well, actually, I know the
See, I
year.
think, I think he died in the 20s.
So he died after they came out here to California?
Yeah, he died out here. And I know it was a suicide, but I don't know what the stories, I've had several stories and I don't know what the circumstances were. Mother told me he'd poisoned himself with a bad batch of moonshine. But then again, Mother was teetotaler. Anybody that drank anything was...
I have here that he died in 1910, so it wasn't that long
It wasn't
after,
that long.
but they would have been in Bell, like you
Yeah.
said.
And when Don was talking about it, the dad had talked to him about it. And the only comment that Don had to make was that the dad talked about that there was blood all over everything. So I don't know whether he shot himself, cut his wrist, poisoned himself, and took
Yeah.
poison or what it was. I've heard several stories on it. But Dad found him after a night.
So, that point, so then your dad had his sister Annie in 19...
Annie was 2 years, I think 2 years older than Dad.
Yeah. So that would meant that your dad was taking care of his mom and his sister after his dad died. And this was like 10 or 12 years before he met and married Grandma.
Yeah, but he was still taking care of them. When they got married, they moved out there
Out there, meaning to Bell?
to Bell. They lived, the complex in Bell was a lot, and it had 2 houses on it. A big house and a small house.
Okay.
And Mother and Dad lived in one of the houses, and Grandma and Annie lived in the other one.
Oh, okay.
And that's where Don was born, and that's where yeah, Don and Lily were both born out there.
Okay. Oh, I just had Don being born in Los Angeles County. I didn't know where he was born. Do you think it was in Bell?
I know Millie was born in the house in Bell. I think Don was. I remember stories because after, see, there's a lot of these stories I don't have a chronology to,
Yeah.
because I know that Aunt Ruby and Jean introduced Mother and Dad,
Right.
and Mother was out here because Aunt Ruby's oldest boy Jack was a baby, and she was out here to help Ruby then. Bob, her Aunt Ruby's second boy, is the same age as Don. And then Bud is the same age as Millie. And where they were living at the time, I'm not sure, but I know that when Jean and Aunt Ruby divorced, Aunt Ruby and the boys came and lived with Mother and Dad.
In Bell.
I think it was in Bell. I don't know.
Actually, yeah.
I really don't know. So that meant Dad was actually caring for
The whole family.
5 people other than his wife and his kids.
Wow. Yeah, his sister-in-law was...
And her 3 children and his
Yes.
2 children.
Yeah, I read off to you that Grandma had told me one time that she met, she was staying with Aunt Ruby, and Charlie was working with Jean, and he had come to Ruby and Jean's house one October. That's when they met, and then that Christmas, Aunt Ruby and her family went to Charlie's mother's house at
That would have
Christmas
been out
time.
in Bell.
That would have been America Francis.
Yeah.
And I had gone to see her, and they were, Ruby and Grandma Cora were at the wooden stove, and they were making fudge. And here comes Charlie walking up and trudged mud into the kitchen, and it made an impression on her.
Yeah.
So the next year they were married, actually. That was the Christmas time, and the next September, Cora and Charlie were married. Okay. Cora came from a big family, Grandma. She had 6
9 children.
6 girls and 3 boys. She was number 7. And the other thing she told me was she was the one who got more spankings than any of them.
Yeah.
Mostly she's talked about climbing the rafters of the barns, even though she knew she wasn't supposed to.
And her brothers and sisters have verified that. I've heard stories from all of them about that.
They were back in Crete, Illinois. She must have been a pretty feisty young lady, or girl.
Yeah, she was. Well, if you ever sat in a room with because I never knew Aunt Bell, but the 5 sisters, because it was Aunt Bell, then the 3 boys, and then the five girls. And those 5 girls were like a unit.
Yeah.
And if you ever sat in a room with all 5 of those girls in there, it was hilarious. I mean, it was like Music Man.
They were about 2 years apart, each of them. I show Aunt Hattie was born in 96, Ruby in 98, Grandma in January of 01, and then Nellie in January of 03. What did I miss?
Mary was the youngest.
Oh, and the youngest is not on here. I mean, it's below this. And then she was born in December of 06, so it was 3 years difference in the last one. So.
And ironically, Aunt Mary and Aunt Ruth, yeah, Aunt Mary and Aunt Hattie were the ones I knew best, really.
The oldest
By
and
the
the
time I
youngest,
came
but-
along, Aunt Ruby was remarried and off living with she had married Charlie, so they'd come over and visit, you know.
They were living in different cities, I mean, different state, were they up in San Francisco?
You know, Aunt Ruby stayed down here, because she was working at,
Oh, okay, you just didn't see her.
Memorial Hospital, yeah. But they didn't come over, they didn't come over to the house, so they weren't living with us.
Okay.
Of course, every time we'd go up to San Francisco, I'd stay at Aunt Mary's house. Or if we went to Redwood City, I'd stay at Aunt Mary's house, and we went to San Francisco, I'd stay at Aunt Hattie's house.
And Hattie's the one that was married to Jim Lynn?
Jim Lynn. They lived in the house in San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. Their address was 102, so it's really downtown
Yeah.
San Francisco. In a house that Jim's father built for his wife when they got married.
Oh, wow, how cool.
So Jim had been raised in it, Uncle Jim had been raised in that house, and
Then Aunt Hattie's
Aunt
kids.
Hattie, Jim and Aunt Hattie's boy. And it was one of the typical old Victorian, straight up and down
Mhm.
houses. I think that Lee Street was one of the streets where, that you see the pictures of all the time.
It was on Lee Street?
It was on Lease, L-E-E-S-E,
Okay.
102 Lease Street.
Okay.
And, yeah, because it was all so picturesque, and they had a staircase in there that was almost straight up and down.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was so steep, and it would curve. Your son Lee, who was just a year older than me, would put pillows on the staircase and slide down it.
Okay.
Couldn't slide down the banister that well
Because of the curve.
The curve in the wall, there was a little wall that stuck out there, but we could bounce down the stairs on pillows.
Lee's the one that you were close with.
Yeah.
And Betty was
And Betty was Aunt Mary's
Aunt Mary's daughter,
daughter,
so.
and Lee and Betty were about the same age, and I was just a year younger. I'm the youngest, I'm number 24 of Grandma Adams' grandchildren.
Wow,
I'm the last one.
the last one.
I'm almost up with her.
Yeah, we have that many now.
Yeah.
And you used to spend a lot of summers up there, in that area.
Well, Grandma and Aunt Nellie never left home.
Aunt Nellie never did?
Aunt Nellie lived with Grandma all the time. They had a house in Redwood City, and then Aunt Mary and Uncle Fred had a house just a few blocks away from them. Uncle Fred was under plumbing up there.
You haven't said very much about Grandma, your grandma. She died in 1942, so you would have been about 8.
Yeah, I don't remember a whole lot about her. And like I say, when we went up there to visit, I'd probably spend one night at Grandma's and Aunt Nellie's. Of course, that's when they'd get the dining room chairs out and
Make the bed for you?
turn the middle one around so I couldn't fall out. They'd have them like this, then back to chairs. And I'd sleep one night there, and then the rest of the time I'd be over at Aunt Mary's with Betty.
Yeah.
And that way Mother was free to visit with them, and they could talk all they wanted to, and I wasn't in the way.
Or you weren't?
Betty and I could, would, you know,
Play
share-
as cousins do.
Play as cousins do, go down to the creek. And Aunt Nellie was a gardener, and she always had a vegetable garden going. And of course, it was usually summer when I was up there, so she would get the little red wagon out, and she'd have all these little lunch sacks full of vegetables, and Betty and I would walk up down the streets and sell them. The ones that we didn't eat. That's when I learned to eat raw peas.
And Nellie was the one you said was a vegetarian.
That's right.
Very healthy. She was 7-day Adventist. Oh, Ruby's. Ruby's was.
Ruby was a 7-day Adventist, but Aunt Nellie was
Just-
always a gardener, and she ended up in spent her last years of her life in a little commune down near the Mexican border.
Kind of like a nudist common.
Kind of a, yeah, who
Yeah.
pretty
A little
much
more-
nature girl.
Yeah.
And, actually, she worked for years. She She was a career lady of the family. She worked for General Motors, I think it was.
Hold on. So what was Grandma doing in Idaho?
When she was, after she got out of school, I don't know the
Eighth
year.
grade, right?
Yeah, she went to the 8th grade. And there was just 2 others at home, because I think Ruby and Hattie were already out on their own. Grandpa sold the farm in Crete, and they bought a farm in Idaho. They were going to try farming out there. But unfortunately, back in 1918, during the flu epidemic, Mother had the flu.
Oh, she got sick with that.
She got-
We were talking about that flu epidemic the other day. It killed
She
a
got
lot of
really
people.
sick with it, and it left her with bad lungs, and that's probably where her emphysema came from eventually. But she couldn't stand the cold weather in Idaho. Yeah, and Ruby was already gone because Ruby was out here in
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, and so Mother left up there, left Idaho, and came down here to LA to help Aunt Ruby.
That's when she came to, and that was about
That was-
1918. She would have been about 18 years
18,
old,
yeah.
17, 18 years old.
She was 21 when she and Dad got married, so I figure,
She met him when she was 20. So, yeah.
but that was the deal. Grandpa sold the farm back there, which had been a family farm. It had been built, I think it was built by Phineas, Mother's great-grandfather.
Yeah.
And they bought a farm in Idaho because he was going to try and make it there. And then she came down here to LA, and then eventually they all moved out here to the coast. All the girls and Grandma and Grandpa lived in California, in Southern California, from San Francisco on down.
Okay.
And all the boys stayed in Crete. Actually, they stayed back there, and eventually one of the family, I don't know which one it was, bought the farm
I
back.
was going to say, I thought it got back in the
Yeah, it
family.
got back in the family.
Yeah.
And that's the farm that you had
The house that I
you
made,
painted.
yeah. And yeah, they bought the family back, they bought the farm back, and of course we found the family cemetery.
Yeah,
back
that
there,
was
too.
cool. We never got any response to the phone calls that I left.
I never got a call on it,
No.
but that was the reason she was out here.
Any idea why he wanted to sell the farm and why he wanted to try to make it in Idaho?
I really don't know.
Was she sick when she was in Idaho, or was she sick when she was back in Crete?
That I'm not sure of. I know that while she was in Crete, she had been postmistress for a while, and that's when she gained a lot of weight, because she had,
That's when she went to 105, huh?
well, she always had that picture of her standing in a doorway, and she covered the whole doorway. But how narrow the doorway was, I don't know, you know. But she always said that's when she was fat.
Why did she gain weight? You started to say, yeah,
I don't know why she gained weight, but that was something that
that happened.
that happened. And she always watched her weight after that.
Yeah, I remember her telling me, I wrote it down, she was weighed 90 pounds until the 50s, and then she got up to 105. That was discounting that period in Crete, I'm sure.
And then when she and Walter got married, she got a little pudgy there for a while too.
Yeah, she was in her 70s or something, I think she was allowed.
And he was in his 70s.
She was in her 60s when they
She
got
was in her
married.
60s, yeah.
Note about Charlie Keck. He was born in Normandy, Tennessee, but he was raised in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Mom had a trip back there where she found that the town had painted murals downtown on the sides of the buildings that depicted an earlier era of the town. Also, she has 2 pictures of houses that were right on the railroad, down by the railroad, and she said there were rows of houses down there that could very possibly be that our families lived there, since Grandpa Keck's dad was a brakeman on the railroad in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and that's where he lost part of his hand. And that is also where Charlie first worked on the railroad. So it's very possible that those houses that she saw would be either the ones or like the ones that they may have lived in during the late 1890s.
And under their property. Now, I don't think it was at the same time that
I don't know.
I don't think they were there at the same time as the Daltons and the Jameses.
I really,
Well, I don't
I think it was like a little bit later, but they used to play in the tunnel that the Daltons and the Jameses used to use to go to
Where would that have been?
in Joplin. She talks about Joplin.
Anderson?
Yeah.
Or
Joplin.
Joplin?
Joplin. It was Grandma Mall because when we were there,
Grandma Mall was born in Kansas City.
when we were
But
in
then she
Joplin,
moved down to Joplin.
when we were in Joplin, Grandma Mall, Grandma Pitts, Rick and I were in Joplin. We went to get a headstone for Uncle Peach's grave and couldn't find anyone who knew anything about it. So they said, well, go talk to to Miss Perkins or whatever her name was that the cemetery was named after. She
Oh.
would probably know. So we went back there and we're sitting there talking and Grandma Mall says something, well, you know, we used to live there, and the gal's name was Lottie, and she said, well, we used to live, and both at the same time, are you Rose Love? Are you Lottie so-and-so? But then they were talking about the tunnels, the James and the Dalton tunnels that went between, the tunnel that went between the James and the Dalton's house and how they used to play in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
And
does that-
it went right through their property, through the property where Grandma lived.
So but the houses that the Daltons and the James lived in were not the houses that our family
No,
lived in, but it was on the property. The tunnel was on
It was
our
between
property.
Tunnel. Yeah, that was between theirs.
Okay.
So the tunnels.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was so cool, listening to that conversation. And I don't remember many details at all, except for talking about the fact that both families had a lot of girls. And at one point, Lottie's mother was sick or had to go out of town or something, so they were spending the night with Grandma's family. And they were talking about putting sheets over the table and
Oh
making
my
tents and with the chairs, and it's just like, oh my goodness, these women were sitting there in their 80s talking about all this stuff they did as these little tiny girls. Evidently they were real young at the time.
Wow. So we're talking the 1890s probably, because they were
Yeah.
born like 1886 is when Grandma was born,
Yeah.
so. Wow, and those are the same types of things we were doing here in
Yeah.
the 60s. I remember us making table tents, and
Yeah.
I did it for my boys, and they loved it.
So they made a tent with the table and the chairs, and spread the chairs out and spread the linens over all of it, and then all the girls slept under it.
Oh my gosh.
Or some of the girls. I
Yeah.
doubt that all of them. since
Probably
both
didn't all
families had
fit.
A bunch of girls.
Now, who was it that rode with Ulysses Grant?
Sherman wasn't there.
Yeah, it was Sherman.
It was Sherman, and it was Grandma.
No, it was
Grandma Love?
Mother.
It was, because I talked to Dad about it not too long ago. It wasn't who I thought it was. It was like a generation off. from
So
what I
not
thought.
Grandma Mall, but maybe Grandma Love or Grandma
Not Grandma Love, but her mom maybe, or something.
Maybe, I don't know. I never could get
I
that
don't
story
know,
right.
That doesn't make sense because the timing would have been,
We figured pretty much that Dad's mother was born around Civil War time. So Grandma
Okay, so
Mall's
wait a minute.
mother would have been a young girl during
okay,
Civil
wait a
War.
minute, where was, okay, we have an America Francis and a Francis America.
Correct,
Which one is on,
Francis America is on your dad's side.
right.
it was, I think, her.
Yeah.
Francis America Grubb
Yeah.
married a Love? That would make sense,
Yeah. So,
because it was, Grandma Pitts said she remembered hearing her grandma talk about it. So that would have been Grandma Mall's mother. But I don't remember who it was that actually did it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure because in the conversation with Dad, that's,
And they were walking, they were going somewhere.
there was.
The whole town was like the Indian
Yeah,
uprisings or
it was-
something?
no,
No,
Civil War.
it was the Civil War. It was Sherman's March. And the whole groups of people were escaping and moving from one spot to another. They were at the river and Sherman picked up this little girl and put her on his horse to cross the river.
So it was Sherman. I always thought it was Grant for some reason.
Sherman.
Okay, that probably makes better sense then. Because I've done some research on Grant and couldn't find where the timing was
And
right.
it wasn't, because Dad was saying it was farther north. than-
Wisconsin,
Yeah, it was that,
that's...
was it the Wabash?
Could have been.
I think it was the Wabash River as opposed to one of the southern rivers.
Because they were from up in that area.
Yeah, that's what had confused him until he did some research on it and found out that, yeah, Sherman really did go that far.
Oh, okay. That's why I couldn't find him. I had the wrong general. The wrong horse rider. Okay, so that's where the James and the Daltons came in at. Grandma Pitts used to talk about, she and Uncle Lee were talking about Uncle Peach, how much they loved him, but you just couldn't rely on him. One day that they asked him to go get a loaf of bread, and he left, and he never came back, and then, I guess it was a couple years later, he showed up at the door with a loaf of bread.
Yeah, evidently
that was something he would do.
everybody loved Uncle Peach.
Yeah.
He was that
Unreliable,
reliable.
just free spirit, did his own thing. The pictures that I have of Grandpa Mall with his brothers, it's usually Todd, and who's the other one that he was close to? There's like 4 of them. Todd's the only one I can remember now. It's Uncle Peach, Todd, somebody else, and Grandpa. I'll have to look at him again. One of his brothers he didn't like too much because he was very much, he was involved with the KKK. He was a preacher, but he was involved in the KKK.
Yeah, and nobody really knew it until his funeral, and then they came and they formed a burning cross on the hill above his.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his grandma and Uncle Louie were talking, and she says, "Turn that thing off." And then she said that there was a funeral, and or not a funeral. I mean, there was the KKK had come to wherever they were in town, in the street, and she recognized his shoes. And Uncle Louie said, "No." And it was the funeral. That's when we found out. And Grandma says,
The door.
Grandpa.
Or was it Grandpa? I wasn't sure which
Grandpa.
one it was. In fact, I think I told her it was Grandpa. Throwing his head in the door after he disappeared for a while to see it, or after family had gotten mad at her, his wife had gotten mad at him.
Yeah.
Toss his hat in the door to see if she did throw it back at him, he could come in.
Yeah, that's what Grandma used to say, that she and Grandpa would have an argument and he'd leave, and then he'd come back later on, she'd be washing dishes later on, all of a sudden the hat would come flying into the kitchen, and then she'd hear him at the door saying, "Well, she didn't throw my hat out, so I guess I'm welcome to come in." And she said that she couldn't help it, she just burst up laughing and she couldn't be mad at him any longer.
That when I was talking about that lesson Sunday school we had about forgiveness.
"Yeah."
And when he was picking on Dan and Julie, he was asking Dan and Julie, putting them in the position that one of them had cheated on the other one,
Oh.
how they would act, you know. And this couple, I mean, they've been together 65 years.
Oh, wow.
You know? And it's just unheard of. And so they were talking about, and then that's when Wanda, Betch and I got into our little head bashing about forgiveness. I said, "But you've got to forgive." She said, "No, you don't. Some things are unforgivable." And I said, "No, they're not. You can understand, and you can necessarily not necessarily forget, but you have to forgive." And I said, "I know because I've been through this recently." You know, that's what we've been talking about. And anyway, I told that little story, and they all cracked up over it.
I had heard that story. I never knew it was Grandma and Grandpa. I thought it was somebody.
It was so
I thought it was something in a movie or something that somebody was
No,
telling
it
me
was
about.
so cute. I can still see Grandma telling that story.
Yeah, oh,
because she
told
would
that story so-
smile every time it got to that point when he would throw his hat in, and I'd be just start laughing, and I couldn't stay mad at him. I couldn't be mad at him anymore.
She really loved him. Can you do that, Mom?
Oh, man.
Careful.
Couldn't get it with his hand.
I forgot. I'm sorry. I should get it for you.
That's okay. You got to learn how to work around this for
I
a
know.
while. Just like closing the car door this morning, I reached out like, oh, I can't do this. Vicki, she was already sitting there.
sorry. Should have thought of that. I don't remember any Grandma Mall stories. And
I
you-
was just
She
telling
was so
somebody
little.
today,
I was 9 when she passed away, but
Yeah.
I wasn't down there very often because we moved to Nipomo
Yeah.
and we didn't go down there
And when we
hardly.
did go down there, you were always in Grandma Pitz's room.
Yep.
She would latch onto you.
I was just telling today in my women's Bible study, talking about Mary being at the feet of Jesus. And I said, one of my favorite pictures of when I was growing up was so many times Grandma Mall in her rocking chair and all of us kids either sitting on the floor in front of her, on her lap, or leaning over the arms of the rocking chair. All of us kids, and her telling, it could be telling stories or just giving us tips on life or giving us half pieces of juicy fruit gum, but we were all there at her feet.
Wow.
You know?
I remember that rocking chair. I do remember something about a finger. She used to do a joke where she would, I can't remember what the story was, but I remember her putting she had a box, she cut a hole in the bottom and she put cotton in it, and she would stick her finger through the bottom and lay it on the cotton, and she put red ketchup or something on to make it look like
her favorite
it was
Halloween
paint.
trick.
Yeah, at one time, we were all of us kids, they had a big table set up in the parlor dining room
Yeah.
there. And we were all doing crafts around the table, painting and stuff. And Grandma comes in, she says, let me borrow a little bit of this paint. Yeah, we don't pay much attention to it. Then a little while later, she comes in carrying this box. You know, I just got a package from a friend of mine, or I got a package the other day from a friend of mine. And she was in this terrible accident, and she goes on and describes some kind of an accident, I don't remember, and chopped her finger right off, and she opens the box, and there's this bloody finger in the box. And we all, and some of us are like, cool, can I touch it? And some of us were like, what's, yeah.
I thought she moved it. I thought
And she did, and
That's what
that's how she really got it, with, she moved it.
And everybody, I remember those stories.
She danced through the door Halloween with a rubber glove that she broke in the refrigerator as a hand.
She put it in the water, you mean, and put it in the refrigerator, like
She
freeze
filled
it?
it with ice.
Oh! I need to say, I don't remember any Halloween stories.
I don't remember, I only remember,
Loved Halloween. She used to love to go wax windows.
Wax windows?
Because that used to be, or soap windows.
Yeah?
That used to be a big Halloween trick. Before it was outlawed, everybody would go out and soap the store windows and all. Sometimes car windows. And